Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven rings with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has brought us. Sing a song full of the faith that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our Father sighed. We have come over a way that with tears have been watered. We have come treading the path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out of the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, God who has brought us thus far on our way, thou who has by thy might led us into thy might. Keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee. Lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Settle beneath thy hand, shall we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land.
Amen. 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 That song ends true to our native land.
Amen. Good morning, everyone. I pray things are well with each of you as we rise into this day, this next day. Today is February 19th, 2023. Everything's good with me. I hope it's well with you also. For those who first time tuning in, welcome. I am Asar, also known as Greg Stanton. I'm the facilitator of this morning's presentation. Each and every Sunday at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, we are out here at what is normally known as the Oasis Spiritual Center Serendipity Sunday. I've shifted it to Oasis time that we come together, and I am giving you information and teaching you some things inside of an African-centered spiritual system. So I hope that you are open to receive this morning as we move deeper into the month of February, which is historically known as Black History Month. At one time, it was only a week long, and then it became a month long. And at some point, for people of African descent, particularly for those who are Africans born in the West, it will become a yearly 24/7 type of a situation for all of us. Because once we do that, then we'll be personifying what it means to love ourselves, what it means to honor our ancestors, honor our mothers and our fathers, that our days may be long in the earth. Well, it's good to see those of you who are joining me on the YouTube channel. For some reason, it dropped off my screen, so I know you're there. If someone is in the YouTube channel that's working in my behalf, feel free to type in the website, www.oasisspiritualcenter.com. For those who want to follow the ministry and know more about the ministry, they can find it there. For those of you who are with me this morning in the Zoom room, I welcome you. I see your faces, or I see your names, and it appears that everyone is doing well by the salutations that I am receiving. And someone said that that was one of their favorite songs. Yes, I'll be grateful. 1978 was one of my favorite songs. Particularly in 1980, I went into the military, and then when I was stationed at my first duty station, I used to listen to Walter Hawkins all the time when I was walking to work. I was there in California, Southern California, Point Mugu, California. That's where I got my start. In 1981, I actually received my call into ministry after a number of things that transpired. It was a continuation of a conversation that I've had with God since I was a little guy. And so I have seen my life totally unfold inside of the question that I posed to, or the desire that I posed to God at an early age. I said, if it was real, show me in my lifetime. And it has really shown me that it is real. So this morning, if you got the email, it stated that I'm dealing with Black History Month and this history and moment, this moment in Black history. And the question was, is the Black church a pawn in a diabolical system? Is the Black church a pawn in a diabolical system? And for the most part, I believe that it has been, and it's up to us to really change that whole scenario. You can't have conscious liberation singing songs that dismisses accountability and responsibility. And that's what I'm kind of going to talk about this morning. I'm going to focus on that one song, Amazing Grace, that most of us are familiar with. I am not stating here that you shouldn't listen to it. You make that decision, but I am going to address some things therein, particularly because those of you who follow me, knowing that I teach a form of New Thought, and New Thought has to do with understanding the power of our words, understanding who we are, that we've been designed intentionally, and that we are a manifestation of God in the earth. And with that being said, if you're singing songs or you have a theology or a philosophy that is not consistent with that, then it impacts your ability to live the lives that we confess that is available to you inside of this particular spiritual system. So we're going to address it. I know that this is a favorite song in the Black church, and I stated that back in the day when my late wife would sing that song, it would like tear up the church. And when I go to funerals, oftentimes that is the song that is sang before I bring the eulogy, which I always try to request a song other than that. It tugs on the emotional strings. Yes, it does. And all those kinds of things. But it really is not speaking powerfully to who we are and what we potentially can be. It is a song of solace for some. So we'll come back to that. I realize that this song is often used to deal with what some people would label as cognitive dissonance, and I'm going to talk about that. But I do want you to know that I believe the church is still relevant today. For those of you who are joining me on this channel today to hear this message, I am not presenting in a way to pull the rug out from under anyone, whatever their beliefs is. I want to put in front of individuals information that they may not be aware of and be able to process it in their own way at their own time. But I really want us to begin to create a narrative that is not imposed on us. And when I say us, I'm talking about those who have had the Christian experience. The word tells us, despise not the time of your new beginnings. And what we have to understand is that, at least I teach, that we all come here inside of a soul agreement, a contractual agreement, which means we're born into the right family system. We're born into the right circumstances. So sometimes when we begin to unpack our lives and see that things have been done to us, when we see that we've been inside of things that is less than favorable, we have a tendency to react to that and say things and do things. But we always have to remind it that all things work together for the good of those all things work together for the good of those who love the law, who understand the universal principles and are called according to their purpose. That is, when you are aligned with what your soul path is, the reason why you're being here, you don't get caught up in other people's narratives. You don't even get caught up in the group that you belong to narrative. You have to be mindful that what is going on in someone else's life is not always pertinent to your own life. And so be careful what you get caught into. It is important that we know our history, however, because what I am finding, the more I study history, even though I was in the midst of history being made, I'm a 60s child, I see now that there's a lot of revisionist conversations taking place. I was in a presentation earlier this week that was put on inside of the VA, and the individual was talking about Dr. Martin Luther King and how he was in Chicago for a year. That's a lie. I know that he was on the west side of Chicago in Lawndale. He had an apartment there, but he didn't stay that long. He probably had to pay the rent to the Jewish landlord who rented that place to him. He paid it up for a year, but he didn't stay there for a year. So sometimes when we get in history, we have to be mindful, even when there's history that's being given by people that look like you, sound like you, talk like you, but everyone gives their story from their vantage point. So I give my story from the vantage point of having been there, of what I've experienced. And I try to give my story in such a way that it's not to manipulate anyone, but it is what it is. So even on this morning, when I talk about this particular song, I'm not trying to persuade you not to listen to it, but I want you to be informed, particularly for those of you who are mastering this thing called life, using the principles of what we call New Thought. You have to understand, and maybe you're not in New Thought, maybe you're just a word church. You're in those churches that are called word churches. And that, I spent a large time of my spiritual unfolding in the word church. It taught me how to study the scriptures, how to use the concordances, how to look at the Greek and the Hebrew, and that gave me a better understanding of the word. But the most important thing that I got from that was the words we speak create the worlds in which we live. So this morning, I want to kind of unpack that again. Again, lay the groundwork by saying I'm not an angry black man. I'm not trying to get anyone to shift their positions. It's just a conversation of awareness. So if you are one who loves Amazing Grace and want it sung at your funeral, so be it. But I want to tell you right now, if they start singing that song at my transition service, please start throwing tomatoes because I don't want that song sang. Okay. Matter of fact, I really, until you can really understand the power of true Christianity, that song I find is one that is helping people deal with cognitive dissonance, and I'm going to unpack that. Now, the song is a powerful song. The song has some deep meaning, but here's one thing you need to know: that what you do speaks ever more loudly than what you say. And when we begin to look at the author of this song, we're going to see that his life prior to the penning of that song is so powerful that it kind of diffuses the message. And he wrote the words, he did not write the melody. And so many people are attached to the melody more so than the words, or the words ride into your life based on the melody. Now, I'm not into music theory. I don't know a lot about that. So I'm kind of speaking extemporaneously right from my heart. And when we open up the dialogue, maybe there's individuals who can speak to the power of the melody, the power of music, the power of the meter inside of music, okay? So when we look at the Black church in America, it has a very particular expression, an expression that's different than the Black church in Africa, the Black church in Brazil. The Black church in America was forged inside of a very specific set of circumstances. And we need to know that. And we need to know the Black church was birthed in America out of. Now, the Black church is not saying Christianity. Christianity existed way before the Europeans got a hold of it. Christianity existed before it began to be exploited inside of the Western system. And so I want to speak, but the Black church, when we talk about the Black church, the ecclesiastical body called the Black church, which started as a result of the Ma'afa, the diasporian experience. It was a response to trauma. It was a response to post-traumatic slaves syndrome. So it was a way that we could begin the healing. It was a way to express through the pain and all the things that came with that. So I want to set the stage because it's important that we deal with timelines. Everything, when you're talking history, make sure you are looking at timelines. So we understand that the enslavement period that was promoted by the Europeans, the English in particular, started in 1619. But the slave period, the true enslavement of Africans by individuals first started with the Arabs, okay? And then after the 1,000 years of the Arabs enslavement, there was the Portuguese began to enslave in 1400s. So about 1442, they started enslaving. So from 1442 to 1619, it was primarily the Portuguese, the Spaniards that was doing the enslaving. So that's important that you realize, even though we start talking about enslavement from 1619, but we have to start talking about enslavement pre-1619, pre-1442. We have to really begin to look at the enslavement of the African psyche by the Arabs. That was when it first started. We started seeing our names get changed, our culture change. We began to see the indigenous African systems be extinguished, or they have been manipulated under the influence of the Arab influence, also just like under the Christian influence. So these are some things you need to take into consideration. This is not just a black and white conversation. This conversation has many layers to it. So I want you to know that. So when I talk about the Black church, and many times the conscious people, individuals, this new community of conscious people attempt to disqualify the Black experience from the church. For it is the Black church that gave many of us our first opportunity to do public speaking. It gave us our first opportunity to do community service. It gave us the opportunity to be up close and personal to professionals. So the Black church has a lot of positives associated with it. It was a way to express, communicate in an esoteric way, the exoteric system that was often imposed on us. Remember, before the African came to America, they had either their indigenous spiritual system, they had a form of Islam, they had Christianity, they had Judaism. So the European did not necessarily introduce the concept of Christianity, but the African took the familiarity with Christianity that was being that was different than the one that was being imposed upon them, and they used it in a very strategic way. Now, people don't talk about that, so that's something you need to understand, that the songs that the Africans sung, the Negro spirituals may have sounded like Christian hymns, but they really were coded messages. And so we have to go back to the Negro spirituals to see how the gospel evolved from that. And a big part of the Negro spirituals was an opportunity for them to express themselves in rhythm, in harmony, using instruments. Now, the instruments were taken from them, but they would do the call and responses. They would use clapping in the black church. Clapping is a big part. When you didn't have instruments, you would clap. When you did not have musical instruments, you would have call and response. So it was participatory. So this conversation this morning is not so much about the history, but I want to drill down this morning into this particular song. Now, because of the enslavement and because of the trauma, when people go through trauma, they take on certain coping behaviors. And so I believe that Christianity is filled with, that is westernized Christianity, the black church in particular, is filled with coping behaviors that has now become commonplace and part of our culture. Trauma will cause you to do things to survive, and not necessarily the things that you should continue on. But if you are not aware of it and it goes on for hundreds of years, it becomes part of the culture and you don't understand why you do it, but you know you do it. So some behaviors that are adopted to cope become part of the culture and don't always represent what I would call our highest and greatest good. And we need to begin to identify which things we are doing that doesn't represent our highest and greatest good. So this morning I'm going to touch on a sacred cow. One of the sacred cows in the black church, beyond the Bible is a sacred cow. The white Jesus still in 2023 is a sacred cow. The westernized version of Christianity is a sacred cow. Even though we found that early in the African experience here in America, we had individuals who understood that the systems that were being promoted, the denominations didn't have our best interests in mind, and we began things like the Episcopalian Church, we have the African Methodist Church, we have the Black Baptist Church as a result of these things. And so we see it was our response to not being able to integrate into a system that really celebrated us, so we created our own. But we took what they were doing and we made it our own. And sometimes that's not even to your highest and greatest good. So this morning, I want to look at this particular song. But before I look at Amazing Grace, there's another song that was written by Dottie Rambo in 1968. And in this song, it's titled, "He Looked Beyond My Fault." And in that song, the first stanza says, "Amazing grace shall always be my song of praise, for it was grace that brought me liberty. I'll never know just why Christ came to love me so. He looked beyond my fault and he saw my needs." So that's a song that has it has amazing grace pulled into it. And sometimes individuals sings these songs and they don't see that it's not the original song. So this song in 68 pulls in a portion of Amazing Grace. So let's look at Amazing Grace. If you don't know, you ought to know that the author of the individual who penned the poem, which ultimately became a song, was John Newton. John Newton was a very terrible person who underwent a conversion. Now, sometimes people undergo conversion because of cognitive dissonance. They're looking for a way to deal with the pain of the realities of what they're doing or what they're thinking. Now, he's an interesting brother, individual. Now, I do make place for people to change. But sometimes, even in your change, what precedes your change gets in the way or disqualifies you to go to the next step with all mankind, such as because of his. See, we live in a day and age today that society is real interesting. They will choose to censor certain people for, like, if you say something against certain religious systems, certain people groups, you will be censored. Okay, they'll take your stuff down. They'll remove your name from the annals of history because you have done something wrong. But yet we do not censor those who have done senseless things to us. Unlike our Jewish brothers and sisters, they say never again. You will never have a Jewish congregation singing a song that was written by the individual who was individuals or the system that was responsible for the trauma that that community experienced. But we as a people group, that is people of African descent, have not begun to love ourselves to the point where we will say that never again will it happen to us. And if you played a role in it happening to us, we're going to hold you accountable. America has yet to stand in accountability. When you study our history, when you look at the fact that when the enslavement process was over, there was a promise made that was never really cashed now or brought into fruition. However, if you get the opportunity, I would encourage you to look up the Port Royal experiment. The Port Royal experiment. The Port Royal experiment was the Union Army had taken over a certain part of the I believe it was South Carolina, and when they got there, the plantation owners, it was about 100 plantation owners, and they left, just up and got out of there, and they left the slaves there, those who had been enslaved. So the about 8 to 15,000 Africans who had been enslaved on that plantation was now free, and that was an experiment. There was a project. Now, anytime there's an experiment or a project that involves Black people, we need to be suspect of it. Over a small period of time, these group of individuals were set free, but yet they were always reminded by the Gideons, the same people that make the Gideon Bible, who were hired by the government to go in there with teachers that came from the north, and the Gideons were there to support them, giving them Bibles, teaching them how to read and all those things. But they always reminded those who had been enslaved, that they were not free, they were property of the war. And so that was an interesting thing. And this is during the time of President Lincoln. And after he dies, I'm giving you an abridged version, then the next president comes in and he returns all the land to the original thieves. I call them thieves because they didn't procure the land in the proper way. And so even the Africans who had worked hard over that in that short period of time and ultimately purchased the land, they lost the land. This is post-slavery. So see, there's a lot of things that are still going on today, a lot of history, and we're talking about allowing them to pass laws, or we are not even talking about it. We're sitting back and allowing laws to be passed that writes this stuff out of history, because they don't want little Johnny or Karen to be impacted. Well, the truth hurts, and sometimes you have to deal with it. Now, that's not my message, but it's part of my message this morning. So when we talk about John Newton, I'm not going to give him my airspace right now by going into his history. You can look it up. You can Google it. You'll find all kinds of narratives. And the short of the story was his father was a slave runner. He ultimately became a slave runner. He also ended up being, because of some situations he found himself in, he was enslaved in Africa, and he worked alongside of slaves in Africa. Ultimately, his father found out about it, and he was gotten out of that predicament. He was running slaves. His ship ended up being in a terrible storm, and they say this is where he penned Amazing Grace. But I really encourage you, if you get a chance, to Google it, YouTube it, and there's some things, documentaries out there. So, like Apostle Paul, remember Paul in the Bible? So let me say this: his time frame that he wrote that poem was 1772. Drop that inside of enslavement by the Portuguese was 1442. So that's 300 years of slavery has been going on. So it's very part of the culture. Then in 1772, is 50 years after the start of the European enslavement, and so he was a participant in this. So I'm saying you can have conversions, you can change, but sometimes your conversion and your change is only to you. It does not take the responsibility away from you in what you have done. And what has happened when we look at Christianity, for the most part, we deal in this conversation of grace, but it's displaced grace. So we look at Paul. Paul, the apostle, had a history that predated him. You know that he used to go about looking for Christians so that he could turn them in, kill them, whatever he was doing. And so the Christians themselves, the disciples themselves, always looked at Paul side-eye because of what he had done. And I say that to all of us. Sometimes we do things before we walk into our calling, before we stand inside of our gifting, but sometimes we'll never be as powerful as we could have potentially been because what we have participated in prior to standing in the who we are to become. So sometimes, again, what we do speaks volumes and get in the way of what we are saying. So please remember this morning, I am talking about a system. I'm not necessarily talking about a people. Now, when I talk about a system, not only do you have the people like Europeans, but you also have African Americans, Africans who were born in the West, who participate in the system and want to see the system continue on because they are profiting from it. So that's why I focus on the system and not the people, because the people can change, but the system stays the same. So the system of racism is deplorable and is used by certain people and even perpetuated by those who have been subjugated to the system. So let's take a look this morning at this song that I'm highlighting. And the song is entitled Amazing Grace. So a couple of things I want to pull out here. So it starts, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Now, I want to stop right there. Press the brakes. You cannot walk in the full expression of divine, as a divine spiritual being, if you buy into this. Now, you may say, well, I really don't buy into it, but if you're singing it, because the words you speak are the words that ensnare you. So if you're framing yourself as a wretch, then you have to be very careful because you probably won't get out of that. It says that saved a wretch like me. Now, let's unpack that. This is not my song. This really isn't your song unless you are rich, unless you have been caught up in wretchedness or been doing wretched things. So this is this man's song, and I will give it to him. So you have to be very careful when you take on other people's narratives, because you are now speaking that into your own life. And some people say, it's just a song. It's not just a song. The society that we're living in today is a result of songs. When we look at the music our children are listening to, it's a result of songs. And you can look in the history of the African American experience and see the songs shifted in the 60s. And in the 60s, there was movement songs. In the 70s, there was empowerment songs. In the 80s, it came all about disco. And then it became about discord. In the 90s, you have all these other songs that come up, gangster rap. You have all this stuff that begins to evolve that we are looking at the byproduct of it. The music that our children are listening to. Not only the words, but the music. Words are powerful and music is powerful. Music moves you, and the words that ride in determines how you're going to move. So when you look at this statement, that saved a wretch like me. So we are not wretches. When you look at the scriptures, the word tells us in Genesis, we were created in his image after his likeness. The word tells us that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Now, there's some people who have fallen from that and they are doing wretched things. But you have to ask yourself, am I wretched? Have I ever been wretched? And so if it doesn't apply to you, you shouldn't be singing it. It says, I was once but not lost, but I am found. Are you lost? Have you ever been lost? Were you wayward? Maybe he was. Said he was blind, but now I see. It says, was grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieve. How precious did the grace appear the hour I first believed. So even in the hour he first believed, he didn't change. So just because someone say they are a believer doesn't mean that they have incorporated that which they believe into their life. They have not received the transformation. So when I listen to this song, I see the process of an individual. I see that all of us at some point goes through a similar transformation, but I'm just leery that we sign off on a song that really doesn't help us in our condition. It says, though through my many dangers, toils, and snares, his dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. This great that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. And then there's another piece that's added, and it wasn't even written by him. It's added to the song. But we say this song was written by him. There's a sister that added this song. Part of the song, he says, when we've been here 10,000 years, bright, shining as the sun, we no less days to sing God praises than when we first begun. And it circles back to Amazing Grace, how sweet the song that saved a wretch like me. Now, I believe this is a poem that was written by him, journaling about his life, journaling about the reality maybe that the Holy Spirit was bringing to him. His conscience was eating at him. He was dealing with cognitive dissonance. He was dealing with the humane side of him, the divine side of him. All of us have a divine nature. All of us have a divine side. I know there are some people that preach that just like it was said that blacks didn't have a soul. Now we have African Americans, Africans who are still saying, or those who are in the conscious community that say white folk don't have no souls. See, all of this stuff is just narratives by people just trying to figure this thing called life out. There's one race. It's called the human race. There's one God, one source, and we all are impacted by it, although it may manifest in various ways. So the term cognitive dissonance is used to describe the mental discomfort that this person was dealing with and results from holding two conflicting beliefs, values, or attitude. Now, we all have that. When we do something we know we shouldn't do, even if you're not reading the Bible, you know if you say something to someone and you step away and you have this like tugging on you where you know you shouldn't have said that, there's a level of cognitive dissonance going on. Somehow the system of enslavement that was put forth by a certain group of people impacted them. There had to come a time where they became desensitized to hearing the screams, desensitized to the fact that you was tearing a child away from his family, a husband away from the community. You became desensitized to that. And so even in the desensitization process of the desensitizing process, yet the heart is still there. The conscious is still there. That's why people are dealing with cognitive dissonance. So he writes this song, and not only am I dealing with the song this morning, but I'm dealing with a set of scriptures. I'm dealing with a set of scriptures that are all around grace. For grace has been misappropriated. People will do the damnedest things to you and then expect grace to cover them. Now, when individuals do things to us, our only obligation is to forgive them. Maybe they know not what they do, so I let them go. If you've done something to me and the relationship is not of value, I let it go and I keep it moving. But if you've done something to me, I will forgive you, but I'll let you know what you have done to me has impacted me, and then how you respond to me tell me whether or not should continue to be in relationship with you. Okay, grace does not cover you when you've done something to someone and you have the opportunity to give reciprocity or to make things right. But we have in America, the church stood by for a long time, and they stood on grace. Even if they acknowledge, yes, their ancestors had a lot to do with it, yet they don't want to take on the responsibility of being this part of the solution. Isn't it interesting? If you look back in the 80s and the 90s, where the white church will send money, will send missionaries to Africa, but they won't send money or missionaries to the urban areas or the inner cities. Now, I see that as there's an issue there. So the very people that are in your own backyard, you won't help, but you will attempt to help someone who is in a place you cannot see. The Black community as a whole is in a deficit, not because we don't have the wherewithal, but because something happened to us. We have to understand, even in our communities, when we took over the communities, when we took over the west sides and the south sides, and when we moved across the tracks, oftentimes the rent was higher, the places was deplorable, the community that should have been a policing example. When you buy a home, usually there's someone from the city or the village that comes in and they do a home inspection. And in that home inspection, they identify things that the homeowner that's selling has to address before they sell this place to you. But it historically has happened that those homes were sold to people of African descent, and they continue to do that today. But when you go to sell that home, you can sell it one day later. You're going to be held accountable to a standard that's very different. So this system is both overt and covert. So why am I talking about that this morning? Because I'm talking about it because the very thing that should be liberating our spiritual system, our spiritual practice is playing into this diabolical system. So the Black church has a lot of work to do. And it starts with Black pastors, first of all, taking on the responsibility of giving a narrative that is true, not based on traditions, but based on truth. So I believe that this gentleman, when he wrote this song, it helped him deal with his cognitive dissonance. It helped him deal with his shadow stuff. And so we have to understand that cognitive dissonance impacts us in various ways. It impacts, we take on beliefs or ideas that help us justify what we've done. And so Christianity, for many people, the way it's given and interpreted, it is the solution to the cognitive dissonance. That's why you can see the oppressive system has adopted Christianity. That same oppressive system that used Christianity, that at one time used Christianity to validate or to send a narrative that Africans had no soul, that they were not true human beings, and that gave them the ability to, it made it okay with them. So for all these years, they were able to do that. So now they have come to the realization that slavery has been outlawed, but they still have these 400 years of thinking this way. It's ingrained in them. Privilege comes forth. They have the church. They promote the church. We identify with the church because we say we're the Christian church. But there's two Christian churches. There's the oppressive Christian church, and then there's the black Christian church. And the black church was a way of dealing with the trauma. So sometimes I started with this, the behavior we take on inside of trauma to survive is not the same behavior we need to continue on to thrive. So we had these Negro spirituals, we had these hymns, we had these songs. And when I go to the black church, particularly certain denominations and like the Baptist church, I sit and I cringe when I listen to some of the songs that are sung. I cringe because people are emotionally moved and they're making decisions. But when you listen to the words of the songs, they are not theologically correct. And so people are making decisions or on emotions. People go to the church just for the music. People go to the church just for community, which is, I understand that. If you don't have community, it's a place to get community. But the church is not about a song. The church isn't about community. The black church should be about transformation. So the question is, why people don't come to church today? Because there's no transformation. They get more transformation by aligning with a life coach. They get more transformation by aligning with the therapist. Have you noticed that some of the most powerful churches, the most influential churches in America today are the churches that are almost mirroring the conversations that life coaches are having, that positive thinking gurus are giving? Because people want to go where they can grow. People want to go where they can change the condition of life. No longer is the message just when you get to the great by and by. No, I want mine now. You came here to do, be, and have, and to express as God in the earth. So what am I saying this morning? I'm saying we got to relook this thing called grace. For the word tells us in Ephesians 2:8-9, for by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not of your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one can boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in. So by grace refers to God's favor. Now, grace does not cover you when you're doing things. Grace helps you move through when you've done something and you know it's wrong. You can't undo it in the physical sense, but grace gives you the ability to identify, I've done wrong, I've wronged someone, and now I have the ability to make reciprocity, restitution. And if you can't make restitution, sometimes you can't change things, but you can acknowledge your part in it. And for a large part of what I see inside of this conversation of grace, people use it as an opportunity to do what they want to do, to abort transformation and just do what they want to do, knowing that all they have to do is say, I'm sorry, or go to God, and you can say, grace covers me. Now, in Romans, it tells us, now the law came in to increase the trespass. But where sin increased, grace abounded all the more. So if there's 6 feet of sin, there's 6 feet 1 inches of grace. And so a lot of people hide inside of those a lot of individuals hide inside of low vibrational activity, knowing if I can make it to church on Sunday, or if I can get to my prayer closet tonight, I will ask God to forgive me, or I can just say grace covers me. But that is not what grace is all about. There's still a responsibility. If you caused hurt or harm to someone, you should be responsible. And so when I look at the Christian church in America, it has played the grace card while at the same time still running the race card. And so that's why the church is not as powerful as it can be, because any onlooker can see that there's no consistency there, that it's all talk. And it realized that there's some things that the individuals who over-identify with the system, you cannot help those who've been hurt by the system. You need to empower those who have been hurt by the system to be the solution in changing the system. We don't need you to come into our community and offer us anything. Just take responsibility and make space for us to do for ourselves what only we can do for ourselves. In 2 Corinthians, it talks about in verse 12, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9 and 10, it says, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Now, some people will say that, okay, I don't have to do anything. God's grace is sufficient for me. But true grace says, okay, I know you've done something. You're sorry for it. You can move through it, but you're accountable for it. It's the law of reciprocity. You reap what you sow. Grace does not take away the possibility of you having to reap what you've sown. It may not show up in your lifetime. We may never see certain individuals, but know this, the universal law: you reap what you sow. It's not our responsibility to hold another person accountable, because you may not ever see them taking account for what they've done. It's your responsibility to be aware of what has happened to you, to be aware that you were not born this way, to be aware of you haven't had the opportunity because the deck has been stacked against you. You cannot do things the way they do things because you have not had the same opportunities. But given the level playing field, you will far surpass what you've done, what you've been able to do. So this morning, my message to you around this song, Amazing Grace, is this. Here's what I'm saying. Grace does not cover acts of injustice. Grace may cover you, but you have a responsibility to make right what you've done wrong. And I'm not talking to anybody outside of our system, our community. I'm talking to those in our community. I'm talking to those in our families. I'm talking to those who look like you, look like me. We've done things to those who look like us that we need to take responsibility for. We are part of what is happening to people. And if you are part of the problem, you are the one that should become part of the solution. You have to take responsibility. You cannot just write it off through your incorrect religious belief system that says it's under the blood. It's what I've done in the past. Well, if you've done it in the past and you still are yet alive, and the person you did it to is alive, you still have a responsibility to make restitution, to acknowledge that, yes, I am the problem. I caused that in your life. So we always can look outside of our community and see what they need to do. But it's some black politicians, it's some black preachers, there's some black doctors that need to say, yes, I played into the problem. So back to the song this morning. So when we talk about not just this song, Amazing Grace, but every song that we listen to, every poem that we read, every meme that comes across, we have to ask ourselves, what is the reality here? Is this something that represents my highest and greatest good? And for me, Amazing Grace, How Sweet the Song, does not represent my highest and greatest good. Because I'm not a wretch. I have never been wretched. I don't practice wretchedness. I don't even have a spiritual system that says I was born in sin and shaped in iniquity. And some people hold that scripture. But that's out of ignorance. They don't understand that that was the journaling of David. David journaled, I was born in sin and shaped in iniquity. Somebody got a hold of his journal and then put it into the scriptures and say, this is a reality that we all born in sin and shaped in reality. We are born in sin and shaped in iniquity. That's not true. For the scripture says that except source opens the matrix of the womb, that child is not born. So why will source allow something that is wicked to be born? No, we are wicked because of the communities that we're cultivated in. We're wicked because we refuse to align ourselves with a way that is more, that leads to light and life. So when we look at David, and I'm closing with this morning, David wrote this, he penned this, just like John Newton penned his. David penned the reality that he said, I was born in sin, shaped in iniquity. Now, if you read not just the Old Testament, but what's called the Jewish Midrash, it's like a deeper understanding of the stories, you'll find that David was writing this as a result of something that was going on in his family system. His mother and father, Jesse, and his mother had separated. And during the time of separation, the children didn't know, the boys were still with Jesse. They didn't know that Jesse and their mom was still in communication. They knew that mom was separate, but they was with Jesse. And over a period of time, Jesse and his wife reconciled, which is David's mother. David was born, but his older brothers thought, wait a minute, mama comes back with this new baby. Maybe it's not dad's. And so over the course of his young life, his older brothers were always egging him on. You're not our brother anyway. And so he became perplexed by it. He was always chasing his older brothers. They never really accepted him if you read the story. And so he's writing this in his journal. I was shaped in iniquity, born in sin. And the reality is he wasn't shaped in iniquity. He wasn't born in sin. The reality is that he was the child of Jesse to his mother. But sometimes we get caught up in our own narratives, and our own narratives can destroy us, because they appear to be truths, but there's no truth behind them. So David had a life filled with challenges based on the thoughts he kept thinking. And I'm saying to some of us, it's dangerous to sing songs. I don't care how they make you feel, how they tug on your heartstring. It's dangerous to sing songs that is not your reality. And that's my teaching point this morning. Amazing Grace. That song can be interpreted in a lot of ways that can help some people. But for the most part, the singing of that song, it's a funeral song. It's a death song. Oftentimes, it's a song that's sung at funerals. It's a song that's sang to move people. And anytime people want to move you emotionally before they ride in with words, you need to be conscious of what portal has been opened. So that's the simplicity of my message this morning. And I leave you with, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. You are created in the image and after the likeness of God. I leave you with the statement, does not your scripture say that ye are gods? Then why are you living less than? Why are not you over-identifying with the fact that you are divine spiritual beings having a human expression? Sometimes we got to let go of what we've been inside of, because what we've been inside of has been the transporter to where we are. And sometimes what you are in can take you to where you need to go. Your destiny is always tied to a destination. And sometimes what you are destined for cannot be actualized inside of what you've determined to be the right thing for you. So that's all I have this morning. I pray that something has been said that has been uplifting, encouraging, and enlightening. I'm not here to attack John Newton. I'm not here to attack those who are still resonating with Amazing Grace. Let that be your story, but this is my story, and I'm sticking by it. Your world is framed by the words you speak. And there it is. All right, we're right at the top of the hour. I'm going to prepare myself to move out of here. But before I do so, I do like to open up the floor for those who are in the room that may have a question. I cannot see on the YouTube chat side this morning. So if you're on YouTube and you're on the Zoom room, maybe you can help me out by either let me know what the question is or the statement is, and I can address it. So I want to see this morning. I see a couple people saying, "Oh, the Royal, yeah, it's the Port Royal experiment." That's Tia. That's correct. It was an experiment to say that if the blacks who are free, if the slave who was free, could they potentially be self-sustaining? What the hell? Before y'all stole them, they were self-sustaining. So that's because, mind you, for 400, 600 years, the narrative been that the Africans didn't have souls. The Africans were slothful. All of these things had to be made to produce, made to work. All of those things. So I encourage you all to look that up. Yeah, people do play the grace card. What songs would you recommend? I love Fran Ham. Here's what I say to you. Listen to the words. So if you have a song that you enjoy, get the lyrics. Look at the lyrics. If the lyrics does not align with your belief system, then you need to know this is probably not the best song for me to listen to. Or if it's a song that you like, some people have taken Amazing Grace and they've changed the words. And if you change the word, it's a song of transformation, but change the words that meet your situation. That's Kuji Tagalia, to do for ourselves, to name ourselves that which we have often expected others to do for us. That's Kuumba. That's the spirit of creativity, to take what we have and make more out of it than it was given to us. Cheryl says, excellent teaching. Thank you, but that's the choir. EWOP. Amir, what's that? I think you told me what that means before, but if you're there, Amir, you can share that with me. I never liked this song. Thanks for helping me understand why. Wonderful teaching. I appreciate it. Like some people it don't resonate with them. And you got to ask yourself, why isn't this song resonating with me? Good. So that's all I have this morning. I don't see any hands go up. The melody, okay. Myrna, who is a professional singer, says, the melody and meter of Amazing Grace was from hearing the humming of the slaves on the ships. Okay. Now I'm going to challenge you. Where did they get that from? Because when you study the origin of that song, that song, that the words to that song was put on top of a set of a melody that was used for a variety of songs. And so sometimes we have to be careful of our narratives that are being given to us, because people will find things to justify, to say this existed, but we really need to drill down. So I challenge you, because there's I don't know music, but as I came across something this week, I saw where there are certain pieces of music that was written that is used for people can lift their words and put their words on it. Like it's called the 868 or 686 meter. You know better than me, but I would encourage you to look that up. The melody meter. Okay. Everything works out perfectly. Okay. Oh yes. Everything works out perfectly. Always. Everything works out perfectly for those who are called according, those who believe, those who are walking in alignment with their soul contract. So everything don't work out perfectly for those who are not aligned with what they came here to do, be, or have. But if you're seeking to walk in concert with your soul path, everything always does work out. Even when you make a misstep, even when you make a mistake, guess what? It will work out favorably for you. Makes Me a Believer is my song, Luther Vandross. Yes, that's a beautiful song. All right. So that's all I have. I thank you for your time. If you want to know more about Oasis Spiritual Center for Divine Living, you can go to the website, www.oasisspiritualcenter.com. If you want to be a blessing to this ministry, I don't harp on it, but if you want to sow a seed into this ministry, please do so. You can go to the PayPal, or you can go to the website and over to the giving page, and you'll find all the information you need. Or you can use our Cash App, which is 708-368-1076. That same number, 708-368-1076, can be used for the Zelle. or you can go to $Oasis Spiritual Center. So that's how you can, if you want to be a blessing to this ministry. Well, I'll see you guys on next week. For those who are joining me on the manifestation course, we'll be together Monday night and Tuesday night. We have 2 different courses going on. One is wrapping up, one is into the second week of it. So I'll see you guys Monday and Tuesday night. Peace, be blessed. Watch what you allow to come into your ears. Your ear gates, guard them. Guard your eye gates. Peace. Take care. I'm going to leave with the song we started with this morning.